in the quiet countryside of northeastern Thailand, where rice fields breathe beneath heavy night air and ancient beliefs linger between the living and the unseen. Love is never taken lightly. But when desire turns into obsession, and devotion becomes possession, something ancient may answer. This is the story of a binding ritual meant to secure love, and the hunger it awakened instead. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Returned from Bangkok. The village of Nong Sang lay quietly beneath the burnt gold glow of the Isan sun. Its rice fields stretching endlessly toward a horizon blurred by heat and dust. Life there moved in slow, predictable rhythms. The clatter of wooden carts at dawn, the smell of charcoal fires at dusk, and the soft hum of crickets filling the long tropical nights. Nothing unusual ever happened in Nong Sang, at least. That was what the villagers believed. Until the day Molly returned. She arrived without warning on a late afternoon bus from Bangkok, stepping down onto the cracked roadside with a single black bag slung over her shoulder. Years ago, she had left the village to seek work in the city, chasing promises of money and a life brighter than the parched fields she had grown up among. Now she stood at the edge of the road in a simple black dress that clung to her thin frame. Her skin pale in a way that seemed untouched by the sun of either city or countryside. Some said she looked tired. Others whispered she looked hollow. But what unsettled them most was the stillness in her posture, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. Children who had once played with her hid behind their mother's skirts. The old women at the well fell silent as she passed. Even the stray dogs, usually quick to bark at strangers, lowered their heads and whined softly. Around her neck hung a frayed red thread tied into a tight knot, darkened with age and something that looked disturbingly like dried brown stains. It rested against her throat like a wound that had never healed. When Molly lifted her face to greet the villagers, she smiled politely. Yet her eyes did not. They lingered too long, unblinking, as if searching past flesh and bone into something deeper, something buried. By nightfall, news of her return had spread through every bamboo house in Nong Sang. People spoke in low voices over evening meals, speculating about the years she had spent in Bangkok. Some claimed she had worked in bars along neon-lit streets. Others said she had fallen in with the wrong crowd. A few insisted she had disappeared for months at a time even while living in the city. No one truly knew. But everyone agreed on one thing. Molly was not the same woman who had left. That first night, a strange quiet settled over the village. The usual chorus of frogs and insects seemed muted, as if the darkness itself were holding its breath. Near midnight, an old man living beside the tamarind grove awoke suddenly. He later swore he had heard footsteps outside his wooden house, slow, dragging steps that circled the structure again and again. When he peered through the slats in his wall, he saw nothing. Only the faint smell of damp earth drifting through the air, thick and fresh, like soil newly turned from a grave. By morning, footprints were found in the dust near Molly's childhood home. They began at her door, and ended abruptly in the middle of the yard, as if whoever had made them had simply ceased to exist. From that day forward, the villagers avoided looking directly into Molly's eyes. Because when they did, they felt a chill crawl up their spines, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Not by the living, but by something waiting patiently behind them. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the wind slipped through the dry rice stalks and brushed against the wooden walls of their homes, many swore they heard whispering. Soft, unfamiliar, and carried on a breath that did not belong to any living soul. The return of Molly should have been nothing more than the homecoming of a lost daughter. Instead, it felt like the opening of a door that had long been sealed, a door the village would soon regret ever allowing to open. And no one in Nong Sang yet understood that something had returned with her. Something that did not belong among the living. Chapter 2. Love Rejected. The temple fair came only once a year, and for the people of Nong Sang, it was the brightest night in an otherwise quiet existence. Lanterns glowed like drifting stars above the courtyard. Incense smoke curled into the humid evening air, and children ran between stalls selling grilled chicken, sticky rice, and cheap plastic toys that flickered with colored lights. Music from an old speaker crackled beside the shrine, mixing with laughter and the steady murmur of prayer. It should have been a night of warmth. Instead, it became the night something inside Molly finally broke. She stood at the edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a tamarind tree, the yellow lantern light failing to soften the pallor of her skin. Her dark hair hung motionless over her shoulders despite the warm breeze passing through the courtyard. Around her neck, the red thread rested against her throat, unmoving, as if tied too tightly to allow even breath. Her gaze did not wander. It fixed on Somchai. He stood near the offering table, his broad shoulders relaxed, his face lit with an easy smile that once made him the pride of the village. Sawdust still clung faintly to his sleeves from the carpentry shop, and when he laughed, his voice carried across the courtyard like a sound that belonged to a simpler world. Beside him stood Dara. She wore a pale silk blouse, her long hair braided neatly down her back. When she looked at Somchai, her eyes softened with a certainty that comes only from a future already promised. Their hands brushed together as they spoke, and neither pulled away. A ring of candlelight flickered between them. To everyone else, it was an ordinary gesture. To Molly, it was unbearable. Her fingers tightened slowly around the bark of the tree beside her. The rough surface scraped her skin, but she did not seem to feel it. Her breathing grew shallow, and her lips moved in faint, silent motions, as if repeating words no one else could hear. When Dara leaned her head briefly against Somchai's shoulder, something shifted in the air. The lanterns overhead swayed though the wind had stilled. The music crackled and cut out for several seconds before returning in a burst of static. A child nearby began to cry without explanation. No one noticed Molly stepping backward into shadow. No one saw her turn away from the light. She walked past the temple gate and onto the narrow dirt path leading toward the fields. The sound of the festival faded behind her, replaced by the dry whisper of rice stalks brushing together in the darkness. Fireflies flickered low over irrigation ditches, blinking like distant signals in the night. She did not look back. At the edge of the fields, she stopped. Above her, lanterns floated into the sky as villagers released them in prayer. Tiny golden lights drifted upward, carrying wishes for health, prosperity, and love. Molly watched them rise until they became indistinguishable from the stars. Then she whispered something into the darkness. The wind moved through the rice stalks in a sudden ripple, bending them all in the same direction. From somewhere far beyond the fields, a dog began to howl. Another joined. Then another. The sound stretched long and mournful across the night, echoing over irrigation canals and empty paddies. Molly closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the softness that had once lived there was gone. In its place lingered something cold and resolute, a decision made beyond doubt or return. Before dawn, villagers saw a lone figure walking along the road that led toward the forbidden forest at the edge of Nong Sang. The path was rarely used, swallowed by tall grass and old warnings whispered from one generation to the next. No one called out to her. No one dared follow. By morning, Molly was gone. Only flattened grass along the path suggested anyone had passed at all. And long after the festival lanterns had burned out and fallen from the sky, the smell of incense still lingered over the fields, heavy, bitter, and tinged with something faintly metallic. By evening, the dogs refused to leave their shelters. And as darkness gathered over Nong Sang, the villagers felt an unease they could not name, pressing gently but persistently against the edges of their thoughts. Love, when rejected, often fades into sorrow. But sometimes, it transforms into something far more patient, far more dangerous, and far less human.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The Abandoned Shrine in the Forest. 3 days passed after Molly disappeared from Nong Sang, and in a village where routines rarely change. Her absence settled like a thin layer of dust over every conversation. No one spoke of her openly, yet her name hovered at the edges of every gathering, unfinished, uneasy, avoided. By the 4th morning, the dogs stopped howling. By the 5th, the air felt heavier, thick with the scent of damp soil even under a cloudless sky. On the 6th day, Molly returned. She appeared at the far end of the dirt road just after sunrise. walking slowly toward the village as mist lifted from the irrigation canals. A farmer guiding his buffalo was the first to see her. He later swore he had not heard footsteps approaching, only the soft slosh of water and the dull creak of harness rope, until he looked up and found her already there. She wore the same black dress, but it no longer moved with the breeze. Her hair hung in stiff strands against her cheeks, and the red thread around her neck looked darker than before, as if newly soaked and dried again. A faint smell followed her as she passed, not sweat, not perfume, but something bitter and resinous, like burnt herbs mixed with old incense left too long in the rain. "Molly?" the farmer called cautiously. She paused. Slowly, she turned her head. For a moment, he believed she did not recognize him. Her eyes seemed unfocused, drifting past his face toward something behind him, deeper in the fields. Then she smiled faintly, gave a small nod, and continued walking. He watched her until she disappeared between the houses, only then noticing that the buffalo beside him had begun trembling, its breath steaming in short, panicked bursts despite the warming day. By mid-morning, word spread quickly. Molly had returned. Some villagers claimed she had been seen walking from the direction of the Forbidden Forest, the dense stretch of tamarind and banyan trees that marked the outer boundary of Nong Sang. Few entered it, children were warned away from it, even hunters avoided setting traps there. At its heart stood the ruins of an old shrine. No one agreed on its history. Some said it had once belonged to forest monks centuries ago. Others whispered that it was used by wandering occult practitioners who trafficked in charms, curses, and forbidden rites. The roof had collapsed long ago, strangled by tree roots and vines, and moss coated the stone altar where offerings were said to rot rather than decay. Elders spoke of hearing chanting deep in the woods on windless nights. And sometimes, they said, a second voice answered. Near dusk, a boy tending cattle claimed he saw footprints in the mud near the forest path, small, bare, and fresh despite the ground having hardened under days of heat. They led inward, toward the trees. None led out. When asked, Molly told no one where she had been. But her neighbor, an old widow who lived 2 houses away, later confided to the temple caretaker that she had seen Molly standing in her yard long after midnight, facing the direction of the forest. She did not move, she did not seem to blink. The moonlight revealed her lips moving slowly, as though repeating words in prayer. Yet the widow heard no sound. That same night, a wind rose without warning, rustling the bamboo walls and lifting ash from cooking fires long gone cold. The smell of smoke drifted through the village, mingling with the bitter herbal scent that now seemed to cling permanently to the air around Molly's home. Before dawn, the temple bell rang once. Only once. The caretaker insisted he had not touched it. At sunrise, a group of women collecting water found a small bundle tied to the tamarind tree near the forest path. Inside were wilted jasmine flowers, a strip of red cloth, and what looked disturbingly like a fragment of bone wrapped in thread. No one claimed it. No one dared move it. By evening, the bundle was gone. That night, as darkness pooled between the rice paddies and cicadas screamed from the trees, the elders gathered on a wooden porch and spoke in low voices. One of them, older than the rest, spat beetle juice into the dust and said quietly, "Anyone who seeks love in that shrine does not return alone." The others did not ask what he meant, because each of them, in childhood, had heard the same warning. The forest does not grant affection. It grants possession. And whatever answers from within the ruins does not understand the difference. Meanwhile, in her darkened house at the edge of Nong Sang, Molly sat perfectly still beside an unlit oil lamp. The air around her smelled faintly of damp earth. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of human hearing, something seemed to breathe in rhythm with her own. Chapter 4. The Shadowless Shaman. The rumors reached the elders before the sun reached its highest point. By afternoon, they had spread through Nong Sang in cautious whispers. Molly had been seen speaking to someone in the forest. No one had seen the person clearly. No one could describe a face. But more than one witness insisted on the same impossible detail. The man she spoke to had no shadow. The first to tell it was Lek, a woodcutter who rarely involved himself in village gossip. He had entered the outer edge of the forest at dawn to gather fallen branches. Careful not to venture too deeply among the old trees. He claimed he heard a low murmur ahead, not quite chanting, not quite speech, carried through the roots and damp leaves beneath his feet. Thinking it might be monks passing through, he stepped closer. Through the tangled vines, he saw Molly kneeling before a collapsed stone altar. Her head bowed, her hands resting palm down on the moss-covered ground. Across from her stood a thin old man wrapped in layers of dark cloth, the fabric hanging in uneven strips like shed skin. The air around them appeared unnaturally still. Even the insects had fallen silent. Lek noticed the sunlight filtering through the canopy behind the man, illuminating roots, stones, and broken columns. Everything cast a shadow. Everything except him. Lek fled before he could be seen. By the time he reached the village, his hands were shaking too badly to hold his machete. When questioned later, he swore he had not imagined it. "I saw the light," he insisted, but it did not touch him. That evening, Molly's neighbor claimed she saw faint gray smudges on the hem of Molly's dress, the color of ash or grave soil, though the sky had been clear for days. The bitter herbal scent that followed her had grown stronger, tinged now with something metallic that clung to the back of the throat. Inside her home, the windows remained closed even in the suffocating heat. No cooking smoke rose from her kitchen. No lamps burned at night. Yet sometimes, villagers passing in the dark claimed they saw a faint red glow flickering through the cracks in her wooden walls, a dull, pulsing light that seemed to brighten and fade like a living heartbeat. 3 nights after her return, Molly finally spoke. Her only friend from childhood, Noi, found her sitting beside the doorway just before sunset. The sky burned orange over the fields, and cicadas shrieked from the tamarind trees as if warning of an approaching storm. Noi hesitated before stepping closer. "Molly," she said softly, "where did you go?" For a long moment, Molly did not respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the distant tree line where the forest swallowed the horizon. Then she spoke, her voice low and calm. "I found someone who listens." Noi swallowed. "A monk?" Molly shook her head slowly. "No." Silence pressed between them. Finally, Noi forced the question she did not want to ask. "What did he ask for?" Molly's fingers tightened around the red thread at her throat. The knot had darkened to a deep brown, its fibers stiff as if soaked and dried many times. "He asked what I truly wanted," she said. "And what did you say?" Molly turned to face her. For an instant, Noi felt as if the air had been pulled from her lungs. There was something unfamiliar in Molly's gaze, not madness, not grief, but a terrible clarity. "I told him," Molly whispered, "I do not want to be loved." The cicadas stopped. Even the wind seemed to withdraw from the fields. Noi felt cold despite the lingering heat of the day. "What do you want, then?" she asked. Molly's lips parted slowly. "I want him," she said, "to be unable to leave." That night, the temple dogs refused to enter the courtyard. The caretaker found them pressed against the outer gate, whining and trembling, their eyes fixed on the dark forest beyond the fields. Near midnight, several villagers awoke to the distant sound of chanting carried across the paddies. The syllables were unfamiliar, heavy, rhythmic, and broken by pauses too long to belong to prayer. Some claimed the voice was male. Others swore they heard a second voice beneath it, faint and strained, as though echoing from a throat filled with soil. At dawn, a thin line of black soot marked the threshold of Molly's doorway. No one saw who placed it there. No one dared step across it. And deep within the forest ruins, where roots coiled around cracked stone and the air smelled of rot and incense, the old altar bore fresh marks carved into its surface, symbols cut with deliberate care, darkened by something thicker than rainwater. The elders did not speak of it aloud, but each of them remembered the warning told to children long ago. There are spirits who grant desire. There are spirits who consume it. And there are those who trade in bonds that cannot be broken, not by distance, not by death, not even by the will of the one who made the bargain. In her darkened home, Molly sat alone as night deepened. The red thread around her neck tightened with each slow breath. And somewhere in the silence behind her, Something breathed in perfect rhythm, as if learning the pattern of a human life it intended to wear.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Love Binding Ritual. The first sign that something irreversible had begun appeared at dawn, when Molly was seen walking toward the edge of the village carrying a small woven basket pressed tightly against her chest. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though each step had been rehearsed long before she took it. The morning air was heavy with mist rising from the paddies, yet a dry smell lingered around her, bitter herbs, burnt resin, and something faintly metallic that clung to the back of the throat. Inside the basket lay 3 items wrapped in faded cloth. No one saw them clearly. But by evening, the village would whisper about what she had gathered. The first offering. 2 nights earlier, Samchai had paused at the carpentry shop doorway to wipe sweat from his neck. When he left, a few strands of hair remained caught on the rough wood. By morning, they were gone. That same day, Molly was seen standing near the workshop, her hand resting lightly against the doorframe as if feeling for a pulse beneath the grain. The second offering. Just before sunset, Molly pricked her finger with a sewing needle and watched the bead of blood swell slowly at the tip. Instead of wiping it away, she pressed her finger against the inside of a small clay bowl, drawing a dark spiral that dried to a dull brown. She did not flinch. She did not look away. The third offering. The final requirement drove her beyond the last boundary most villagers would ever cross. That night, beneath a moon veiled by thin cloud, Molly walked alone to the neglected cemetery behind the old tamarind grove. The earth there was soft and uneven, the wooden grave markers leaning at angles like broken teeth. Wind moved through the dry grass in restless waves. She knelt before a grave no one had tended in years. The soil was loose, as though disturbed by burrowing animals or long-ago floods. With her bare hands, she began to dig. Dirt packed beneath her nails. The smell of damp earth rose thick and suffocating. When her fingers struck something hard, she paused. Then she pulled. The fragment she lifted into the moonlight was pale and smooth, a small piece of bone, its edges worn by time and soil. For a long moment, she held it against her chest, eyes closed, lips moving silently. The wind died. Even the insects fell silent. When she rose to leave, the soil she had disturbed appeared darker than the surrounding ground, as if freshly soaked. Return to the shrine. Before dawn, Molly walked the narrow path into the forbidden forest. Mist coiled low between the trees, wrapping around exposed roots and crumbling stone. The ruined shrine emerged slowly from the fog, its collapsed roof swallowed by vines and strangler figs. Moss coated the altar in thick green layers, and the air smelled of rot, incense, and stagnant water. He was already waiting. The old man stood beside the altar, draped in dark cloth that absorbed the thin gray light filtering through the canopy. His face seemed neither old nor young, its lines shifting subtly when one looked too long. Where sunlight touched the stone floor behind him, shadows formed clearly, from roots, broken pillars, and Molly herself. He cast none. Molly knelt. Her basket trembled slightly in her hands. Without speaking, she placed the offerings upon the altar, the strands of hair bound in thread, the dried spiral of blood inside the clay bowl, and the fragment of bone wrapped in red cloth. The air thickened. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch cracked. The old man's voice emerged at last, dry and layered, as though 2 tones spoke in imperfect unison. "Do you understand the cost?" Molly did not raise her head. "Yes. This binding does not create love," he continued. "It creates hunger. It creates attachment beyond will." "I understand. If the bond fails," he said, "it will not release you." Her fingers tightened against the moss-covered stone. "I understand." Silence pressed in from all sides, heavy and absolute. Then the chanting began. The syllables were low and rhythmic, older than language Molly recognized. They vibrated through the altar stone and into her bones, settling deep within her chest. The air grew colder despite the humid forest heat, and a faint red glow seeped into the cracks of the ancient stone. The clay bowl trembled. The strands of hair curled inward. The fragment of bone darkened, as though absorbing moisture from unseen breath. Molly felt pressure behind her sternum, a tightening that spread slowly through her ribs, as if unseen fingers were testing the strength of her body from within. Her vision blurred. For a moment, she thought she saw another figure kneeling opposite her, a woman with long hair veiling her face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Then the image was gone. The chanting stopped. The forest exhaled. Birds cried out suddenly from the canopy above, their wings beating in frantic bursts as if fleeing an unseen disturbance. The old man reached forward and tied a fresh red thread around Molly's neck, pulling the knot tight until she gasped. "Return home," he said. "Do not look back." She obeyed. But as she stepped away from the shrine, she felt it. A second rhythm beneath her heartbeat. Slow, patient, and listening. By the time Molly emerged from the forest, the sun had begun to rise, casting long beams of light across the paddies, yet the air around her remained faintly cold. Back in Nong Sang, dogs whined and backed away as she passed. Chickens fluttered violently in their coops. And throughout the day, a dull ache spread across her chest, pulsing in time with that unfamiliar rhythm beneath her ribs. That night, the wind carried the smell of damp soil across the village. And somewhere beneath the sound of cicadas and rustling bamboo, something new had begun to breathe. Chapter 6. The First Signs of Possession. At first, the change in Somchai was so subtle that no one could say exactly when it began. Perhaps it started the morning he forgot to greet the elders at the roadside shrine, a habit he had never neglected since boyhood. Or perhaps it was later that afternoon, when he left the carpentry shop door standing open, tools scattered across the workbench as if abandoned mid-task. In Nong Sang, small routines carried meaning, and when those routines faltered, people noticed. By the second day, whispers had begun. Somchai no longer laughed. He answered questions slowly, as though the words had to travel a long distance before reaching his mouth. When customers spoke to him, his gaze drifted past their shoulders, lingering on something invisible in the air behind them. Once, when an elderly woman pressed coins into his hand, his fingers remained limp, unresponsive, until she gently folded them closed herself. He did not apologize. He did not seem to realize anything was wrong. The forgotten promise. Dara was the first to confront him. She found him standing outside his workshop at dusk, staring toward the far end of the road where Molly's house stood in shadow beneath the tamarind trees. The sky burned amber behind the fields, and smoke from cooking fires drifted low across the village. "Somchai," she called softly. He did not turn. She stepped closer and touched his arm. His skin felt cold. Not cool from shade, cold, like clay left overnight in rainwater. He blinked slowly and turned to face her, but his expression remained distant, as though he were waking from a dream he did not fully understand. "You forgot to come to my father's house," she said. "We were waiting." A long pause followed. "I was busy," he replied. The words came without warmth, without apology, without recognition of what had been promised between them. Dara searched his face for the man she had known since childhood. For a moment, she thought she saw him, a flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes. Then his gaze drifted past her shoulder, toward the road, toward Molly's house. A compulsion without thought. From that evening onward, Somchai began passing Molly's house every day. At first, it seemed coincidence. The path between the workshop and the irrigation canal cut close to her yard, and no one thought to question it. But soon villagers noticed that he slowed as he approached her gate. Sometimes he stopped. Sometimes he stood for several long minutes, unmoving, as if waiting for instructions he could not hear. If Molly appeared at the doorway, he stepped forward without hesitation. If she did not, he remained until dusk swallowed the path, then turned and walked home without speaking to anyone. Children began avoiding the road entirely. Even the stray dogs gave the house a wide berth. The first touch. One afternoon, Noi watched from across the narrow path as Somchai approached Molly's doorway. The sky hung low with the threat of rain, and the air pressed thick against the skin. Molly stepped outside. She did not smile. She did not speak. For several seconds, they simply stood facing one another. Then Somchai reached out and touched her wrist. His entire body convulsed. The movement was brief, a violent shudder passing from his shoulder down his spine. Like a current of electricity surging through muscle and bone, his breath caught sharply in his throat, and his knees buckled as if his body no longer trusted its own strength. Yet he did not pull away. Instead, he tightened his grip. Molly's expression remained calm, almost tender. But Noi, watching from a distance, felt an inexplicable pressure build in her ears, as though the air itself had thickened. A faint ringing sound vibrated at the edge of hearing, rising and falling in uneven pulses. The moment stretched. Then Somchai released her. He staggered backward, blinking rapidly, confusion flickering across his face. For an instant, he looked like himself again. Then the emptiness returned. Without a word, he turned and walked away. Molly watched him go, her hand still lifted where he had touched her, fingers curled slightly as if holding an invisible thread. The second voice. That night, villagers living near Molly's home reported hearing voices through the thin wooden walls. One was Somchai's, low, subdued, speaking in halting phrases. The other voice was difficult to describe. It sounded strained, breathy, and uneven, as though forced through a throat not meant to shape human words. Sometimes it seemed to overlap his voice, echoing half a second behind, repeating syllables in a distorted murmur. No one understood what was being said, but several listeners agreed on one detail. The second voice did not belong to Molly. The village reacts. By the fourth day, unease had settled over Nong Sang like a gathering storm. Chickens refused to wander near Molly's yard. Buffalo resisted being led past the tamarind grove. At dusk, the temple dogs whined and pulled against their chains, their eyes fixed on the narrow path leading to her house. The elders began sitting together earlier in the evenings, speaking in low voices that fell silent whenever younger villagers approached. No one mentioned the word possession. No one mentioned the forest shrine. But everyone felt the same unspoken dread tightening in their chests. Something beneath the skin. As night deepened, Somchai lay awake on his mat, staring at the rafters of his small wooden home. Sleep would not come. Each time his eyes closed, he felt a pressure behind his sternum, a slow, deliberate tightening that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Except the rhythm was not his own. It lagged behind. Then it caught up. Then it pressed forward, as if trying to set the pace. He sat upright, breath shallow. In the darkness, he thought he heard breathing that did not belong to him. Measured. Patient. Waiting. He pressed his palm against his chest. For a moment, the pressure subsided. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep within his ribs, he felt a second pulse answering his touch. Outside, the wind moved through the dry rice stalks. From the direction of Molly's house, a dim red glow flickered once, then vanished. And in the suffocating silence that followed, Somchai realized with growing horror that he could no longer remember when he had last chosen where to go. Or why.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. Breathing that did not belong to the living. By the time Somchai stopped returning to his own home at night, no one in Nong Sang could pretend that what was happening was ordinary. At first, he lingered late at Molly's house, leaving only when the last cooking fires in the village burned low. Then he began staying past midnight. Within days, the faint light from her shuttered windows burned until dawn, and his small wooden house stood dark and silent beneath the tamarind trees. No explanation was offered. None was asked. But the villagers listened. In a place where walls were thin and night carried sound easily across open fields, nothing remained private for long. The house that did not sleep. Molly's house stood at the edge of Nong Sang where the packed dirt path narrowed into a trail swallowed by tall grass. During the day, it appeared unchanged, a weathered wooden structure raised on short stilts. Its paint long faded by heat in monsoon seasons. At night, it felt different. The air around it cooled noticeably after sunset. Insects that hummed loudly elsewhere fell strangely quiet near its walls. Even the wind seemed to slip around the structure rather than pass through it. Then came the voices. At first, they were heard only by those living closest. Murmurs drifting through the bamboo slats long after midnight. Sanchai's voice emerged in low, uneven phrases, as though he were speaking while half asleep. The second voice came later. It did not replace his voice. It followed it. A strained whisper, hoarse and breath-thin, repeating fragments of sound with a delay that made the words feel warped. As though the echo were learning how to form language by imitation alone. Sometimes both voices overlapped, producing a vibration that made listeners press their palms over their ears without knowing why. No one understood the words. Yet everyone who heard them felt the same creeping chill. The certainty that the second voice did not belong to any living throat. Witness in the dark. One night, an old fisherman named Prossert, returning late from the canal, paused when he saw dim light leaking through the gaps in Molly's shuttered windows. The glow was not the warm amber of oil lamps. It pulsed faintly red, brightening and fading with slow, deliberate rhythm. He told himself to keep walking. Instead, he stepped closer. As he neared the wall, the murmuring inside grew clearer. Sanchai's voice trembled as if speaking through exhaustion. Then the other voice answered. Prossert could not later recall the words. Only the sound, thick, damp, and strained, like breath forced through a throat filled with mud. The red glow brightened. And for a brief, paralyzing instant, two silhouettes crossed the thin cloth curtain inside the room. One was Sanchai's. The other appeared elongated, its shoulders bending at an unnatural angle. Its head tilting too far forward, as if its spine had never been meant to support human weight. Prossert fled without realizing he had begun to run. He did not return to the canal after sunset again. Sanchai's stillness. During the day, Sanchai moved through the village like a man pulled by invisible thread. He spoke little. He no longer ate with others. When addressed, he responded only after long pauses, his gaze drifting past faces toward distant points no one else could see. Once, a child ran into him in the path. Sanchai did not react. He remained standing, unmoving, until Molly appeared from behind him and touched his shoulder lightly. Only then did he step forward again, as though motion required permission. The night breathing. Neighbors closest to the house began waking at the same hour each night, just before 3 in the morning, when the air felt thickest and the darkness most complete. At that hour, the murmuring stopped. In its place came breathing. Not one rhythm. Two. One slow and human. The other shallow, uneven, and slightly delayed, inhaling a fraction of a second after the first, exhaling just before it ended. Some listeners described it as imitation. Others called it practice. All agreed it was unbearable to hear. Several families began lighting incense before sleep. Others placed amulets above doorways and windows. A few sent their children to stay with relatives in neighboring villages. Still, the breathing continued. Inside the room, Sanchai rarely remembered the hours after midnight. He remembered sitting beside Molly on the woven mat, the air thick with the scent of burnt herbs and damp earth. He remembered her fingers resting lightly over his wrist, her touch both gentle and unyielding. He remembered the sound of whispering near his ear. But when he turned his head, no one was there. Sometimes he felt warmth against his back, as though someone leaned close behind him. Sometimes he felt fingers resting lightly over his ribs from within, pressing outward as if testing the shape of his chest. And when exhaustion finally pulled him towards sleep, he felt the mat shift beside him, not from movement above it, but from weight settling slowly into the space between them. He never opened his eyes, because he knew, with a certainty deeper than fear, that if he looked, he would see someone lying where no one should be. The village holds its breath. Within a week, the entire village understood that Molly's house did not belong to the night in the way other homes did. People avoided the path after sunset. Conversations fell silent when the wind shifted from that direction. Even the temple dogs, once fierce and restless, lay with their noses tucked beneath their tails, refusing to face the edge of the village after dark. No one spoke openly of spirits. No one spoke of possession. Yet unease spread like moisture through bamboo walls, seeping into sleep, into silence, into the spaces between heartbeats. And in the darkest hour before dawn, when the sky hung heavy and starless over Nong Sang, the house at the edge of the fields exhaled slowly into the night. 2 breaths. Perfectly aligned. One learning. One fading. Chapter 8. Dara's Dreams of the Dead. The dreams began on the 7th night. Dara awoke before dawn with her heart racing and the taste of soil thick at the back of her throat. For several seconds she lay frozen beneath her thin blanket, unsure whether she had been sleeping at all. The room felt colder than it should have been, the air damp against her skin despite the lingering heat of the season. She pressed her hand against her chest and tried to slow her breathing. Outside, the village remained silent, but the smell of wet earth did not fade. It lingered, heavy and unmistakable. The first dream. In the dream, she stood alone in the rice fields at dusk. The sky burned deep orange near the horizon while the paddies around her lay motionless, their shallow water reflecting a sky that seemed too dark for evening. No insects sang, no wind moved. Somchai stood in the distance. His back faced her. Relief flooded through her chest. She called his name. He did not turn. She began walking toward him, the mud sucking softly at her ankles with each step. The distance between them did not seem to shrink, no matter how far she moved. Then his shoulders twitched. A thin crack split the skin at the back of his neck. Another spread across his shoulder blade. The sound was faint, like dry clay breaking. He began to tremble. The cracks widened. Something beneath the skin shifted. Dara tried to scream, but the air thickened in her throat. Slowly, the skin along his spine peeled apart. A hand pushed outward from inside his back. Not breaking through. Emerging. The fingers were long and pale, coated in dark soil. They gripped the edges of torn flesh and pulled wider, revealing strands of muscle and something darker beneath. Then a head forced its way through the opening. Long black hair spilled forward, veiling a face she could not see. The figure crawled out of Somchai's body with slow, deliberate movements, its limbs unfolding like something long folded into too small a space. When its feet touched the waterlogged field, Somchai collapsed soundlessly into the mud. The woman stood upright. Her hair slid aside. Where her eyes should have been, there were only dark hollows filled with shifting shadow. Dara woke choking on a scream that never left her throat. The smell of earth. She sat upright on her sleeping mat, gasping for air. Her chest ached as if she had been running. The room was dark, yet the faint outline of furniture seemed distorted, unfamiliar. Her mother stirred on the far side of the room. "Dara?" she murmured. "Are you ill?" "I'm fine," Dara whispered, though her voice trembled. She wiped her face and found her cheeks damp with tears she did not remember shedding. The smell lingered. Wet soil. Freshly turned. She lit a small oil lamp, its flame flickering weakly against the walls. As the light steadied, the familiar shapes of her home returned, and the suffocating pressure in her chest eased slightly. She told herself it had only been a nightmare. Yet when she lay down again, she kept her eyes open until the sky began to pale. The second night. Sleep came reluctantly the next evening. When it did, the dream returned. This time, she stood at the edge of the irrigation canal. The water was black and perfectly still, reflecting no stars. Mist clung to its surface like breath suspended in air. Something drifted just beneath the surface. She knelt. The water rippled outward. A face rose slowly from below, not breaking the surface, but appearing beneath it as though the canal were glass. Somchai's face. His eyes opened. They were filled with mud. His mouth moved. No sound emerged. Behind him, deeper in the black water, she saw strands of long hair spreading outward like roots. She woke with her fingernails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. The object beneath the pillow. By the third morning, exhaustion weighed heavily behind her eyes. She rose before the others and stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear the lingering unease. The dawn breeze carried the scent of jasmine and cooking smoke. No trace of damp earth remained. For a moment, relief softened her shoulders. Then she returned inside to fold her bedding. As she lifted her pillow, something small and hard rolled against the mat. She froze. It was a tooth. Yellowed with age, its root darkened and brittle. Dried soil clung to its base. Her breath caught sharply. She stared at it, unable to move, as cold spread slowly through her limbs. Her mother called from the cooking area, asking her to bring water. Dara did not answer. With trembling fingers, she wrapped the tooth in cloth and carried it outside. The morning sun had fully risen now, flooding the yard with light. Still, she hesitated before throwing it into the brush beyond the fence. For a brief instant, she felt certain it had been placed beneath her pillow deliberately. Not by human hands. The village notices. By midday, neighbors remarked on Dara's pallor. Her eyes appeared shadowed, her movements slow and distracted. When spoken to, she sometimes failed to respond until her name was repeated several times. At the well, an older woman touched Dara's wrist and frowned. "You are cold," she said, like someone who has walked in rain. Dara forced a smile. "I did not sleep well." The woman's gaze lingered a moment too long before she released her. A warning unspoken. That evening, as the sun sank behind the tamarind grove, Dara stood at the edge of the path leading toward Molly's house. She did not intend to walk further. She told herself she only wanted to see. The house stood silent beneath gathering shadow. No smoke rose from the kitchen. No movement stirred behind the shuttered windows. Yet the air felt thick, pressing gently against her skin. A faint ringing began in her ears. From somewhere deep within the house, she thought she heard breathing. Two rhythms. One human, one not. She stepped back. The sound stopped instantly. The wind moved through the dry rice stalks, carrying with it the faint scent of damp soil. Dara turned and hurried home without looking back. That night, when sleep finally took her, she dreamed of standing in a field of freshly turned earth beneath a starless sky. She was not alone. Something stood behind her, breathing softly near her ear. Waiting. Learning. And with each slow inhale, she felt certain it was growing closer to understanding what it meant to live.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Monk's Warning. The temple bell rang before sunrise. Only once. The sound drifted across Nong Sang like a single ripple over still water. Low and hollow, dissolving into the heavy dawn air before anyone could be certain they had truly heard it. The caretaker later swore he had not touched the rope. Yet by morning, word spread that the old monk had requested the presence of the village headman. In Nong Sang, such a request was never made lightly. The temple at first light. Wat Nong Sang stood on slightly raised ground at the center of the village. Its faded saffron banners hanging motionless in the humid air. The wooden prayer hall, weathered by decades of monsoon rains, exuded the faint scent of incense and candle wax soaked deep into its beams. When Headman Pricha arrived, he found the old monk seated cross-legged before the main Buddha image. His back straight despite the weight of years. Thin morning light filtered through the slatted windows, striping the floor in pale gold. Several incense sticks burned before him, though their smoke did not rise cleanly. Instead, it drifted sideways, curling and twisting as if guided by an unseen current. The monk did not look up when the headman approached. "You heard the bell," he said quietly. Pricha bowed. "Yes, Luang Por." Silence lingered. Outside, birds began their morning calls, tentative and subdued. An uneasy presence. The monk lifted his gaze at last. His eyes, clouded with age, held a clarity that made Pricha instinctively lower his own. "There is a disturbance," the monk said. "In the forest?" the headman asked. The monk did not answer immediately. He turned slightly toward the open doorway, where the village lay in soft gray light beyond the temple steps. "It has moved closer," he replied. Pricha felt the fine hairs along his arms rise. "You speak of spirits?" "I speak," the monk said, "of hunger." The word settled heavily between them. A bond that should not exist. The monk motioned for Pricha to sit. "A binding ritual has been performed," he continued, not in reverence, Not in balance, in desire. Preach's throat tightened. He did not ask whose desire. He already knew. The old shrine, he said quietly. The monk inclined his head. That place was abandoned for a reason. It was not built for devotion. It was built for transactions, exchanges between the living and the unseen. The incense smoke thickened, drifting low across the floor. What has been summoned? Pritcha asked. The monk's expression hardened. Not summoned, he corrected. Invited. Phi Tai Hong. The monk spoke the name softly, as if sound alone carried weight. Phi Tai Hong. The term was old, rarely spoken outside whispered caution. Spirits of those who died violently, unjustly, or in profound emotional torment. Souls that could not release their attachments and lingered in restless hunger. When desire binds itself to grief, the monk said, such spirits are drawn like insects to flame. Pritcha swallowed. And the ritual? Does not create love, the monk replied. It creates attachment beyond consent, beyond will. It forces proximity where none exists. Outside, the wind stirred dry leaves across the temple steps. If the bond holds, the monk continued, the living suffer. And if it fails? Pritcha asked. The monk's gaze darkened. It seeks another way to remain. Signs already seen. The headman spoke of what the villagers had witnessed. Somchai's hollow gaze. The voices in the night. Dara's nightmares. Animals refusing to pass Molly's home. The monk listened without interruption. When Pritcha finished, the old man closed his eyes briefly, as if listening inward to something distant. The signs are consistent, he said at last. With possession? Pritcha whispered. With attachment, the monk corrected again. Possession consumes, attachment learns. A chill spread through the prayer hall. The sound without hands. As they spoke, a dull tapping sound echoed from the rear of the temple, slow. Irregular knocks against wood. Pritcha turned sharply. No one stood there. The caretaker emerged moments later from the side corridor. His face pale. I heard it too, he whispered. The monk remained still. Do not answer it, he said. The tapping stopped. But the silence that followed felt heavier than before. What must be done? What can we do? Pritcha asked. The monk studied the fading incense smoke before answering. The bond must be broken before the spirit fully anchors itself. And if it has already begun? The monk did not reply immediately. Instead, he reached for a small brass bowl beside him and struck its rim lightly with a wooden striker. The tone vibrated through the hall, pure at first, then subtly distorted, as though a second resonance trembled beneath the first. If it completes its attachment, he said quietly, separation will no longer be possible. Pritcha's chest tightened. And the woman? The monk's gaze lifted to meet his. She will no longer be alone within herself. A village holds its fear. By mid-morning, the headman left the temple with instructions he did not yet know how to carry out. The sun climbed higher, and daily life resumed its motions. Rice spread to dry. Cooking fires lit. Children called indoors. Yet unease lingered in every glance, every unfinished sentence, every pause that lasted a fraction too long. By evening, several households placed protective charms above their doors. Others burned incense until the air inside their homes grew thick and bitter. The temple dogs refused to enter the courtyard after sunset. The bell at dusk. At twilight, as shadows stretched long across the patties, the temple bell rang again. Only once. This time, the caretaker stood beside the rope. He had not touched it. Across Nong Sang, people paused in doorways and along narrow paths, listening to the echo fade into the thickening dark. From the direction of the forest, a wind rose briefly, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and burnt herbs. And in the house at the edge of the village, where the windows remained shuttered and the air pulsed with a faint, unseen rhythm, something shifted, not yet anchored, not yet complete, but patient, learning, waiting, listening to the fragile beat of human hearts, and the deeper hunger that bound them together. Chapter 10. The Slow Rot. The first person to notice the smell was the woman who lived across the narrow path from Molly's house. At dawn, while sweeping fallen leaves from her yard, She paused and lifted her head, frowning at the air. The scent drifted faintly at first, threading through the warm morning breeze, not the familiar odors of livestock, cooking smoke, or stagnant canal water. This was different. Sweet. Heavy. Wrong. By midday, the smell had thickened. By evening, it clung to the back of the throat. No one spoke of it aloud, yet windows were shuttered earlier than usual, and children were called indoors before the sun had fully set. Somchai stops eating. Somchai no longer visited the food stalls near the temple courtyard. He did not sit with the other men during evening meals. When neighbors offered bowls of rice or grilled fish, he accepted them politely, then left them untouched. One afternoon, Noi watched from a distance as he lifted a spoon toward his mouth, paused, and lowered it again as if he had forgotten what to do next. His lips had taken on a faint gray tint. The skin beneath his eyes darkened, not with sleeplessness alone, but with something deeper, a slow draining of warmth that left his face hollow and unfamiliar. Yet he did not complain of illness. He did not seem aware that anything was wrong. The coldness beneath the skin. When Molly touched him, witnesses noticed he shivered violently, as though cold water had been poured down his spine. But he did not pull away. Instead, he leaned closer. The contact appeared both painful and necessary, a tension between recoil and need that unsettled anyone who saw it. One afternoon, Dara's mother brushed past Somchai near the well and later whispered to her neighbors that his arm felt colder than the clay jar she had drawn from the canal that morning. "Not cool," she said. "Cold." The smell grows stronger. By the third day, the odor could no longer be ignored. It seeped into clothing hung to dry. It clung to the woven mats inside nearby homes. It lingered in the throat even after incense was burned to mask it. Some described it as rotting fruit left too long in heat. Others said it resembled damp soil layered over spoiled meat. The elders spoke quietly of imbalance. No one spoke of decay. Inside the house, at night, the faint red glow returned behind Molly's shuttered windows, pulsing slowly like the rhythm of a living organ. The murmuring voices had grown softer. In their place came long stretches of silence broken only by breathing, two rhythms. One weakening, one steady. Occasionally, a low cracking sound echoed through the wooden walls, like dry bamboo splitting under pressure. No one wanted to imagine its source. Somchai's reflection. Late one afternoon, as the sky gathered heavy clouds, Somchai paused beside a rainwater jar near the side of the house. The surface of the water lay still, reflecting the gray sky above. He leaned closer, as if drawn by something beneath the surface. For several seconds, he did not move. Then he recoiled sharply. The water rippled outward in frantic rains. He staggered backward, breathing in shallow bursts, eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on terror. Inside the jar, the reflection steadied. It showed only the cloudy sky. But Somchai pressed his palm against his chest, as though trying to calm a second heartbeat struggling beneath his ribs. The skin begins to change. Noi saw it first. As Somchai reached to steady himself against the wooden doorframe, his sleeve slipped back, revealing a patch of skin near his wrist that appeared unnaturally pale, not merely bloodless, but faintly mottled, as though bruising lay beneath the surface. Over the next days, the discoloration spread slowly upward along his forearm, hidden beneath loose sleeves and shadow. Flies began to gather near the doorway. They did not land on Molly. They circled Somchai. The village holds its breath. By now, fear moved quietly through Nong Sang. No one walked the path past Molly's house after dusk. Even the temple dogs, once fierce guardians, refused to approach the edge of the village, whining softly whenever the wind shifted from that direction. Incense smoke thickened in many homes, burning day and night. Protective charms appeared above doorways. Mothers whispered prayers while their children slept. Still, the smell remained. Still, the silence deepened. Something breaking down. That night, as heavy rain clouds gathered without releasing a drop, Somchai lay on the woven mat beside Molly, staring into the darkness. His body felt distant, his limbs heavy. Each breath dragged through his chest as though passing through damp cloth. Beneath his sternum, the second rhythm pulsed steadily, stronger now. More certain, no longer lagging behind his own heartbeat but pressing forward, urging his body to follow its pace. He swallowed, but his throat felt dry and thick. "Molly," he whispered. She did not answer. Her hand rested lightly over his chest. The pressure beneath his ribs intensified. A faint cracking sensation spread through his breastbone, subtle but unmistakable, like hairline fractures forming under slow, persistent strain. He gasped. Her fingers tightened. "It will be easier," she murmured softly, her voice calm and distant, "if you stop resisting." The air in the room grew colder. From somewhere close, impossibly close, he felt warmth against his back, as though another body leaned gently against him from behind. He tried to move. He could not. His breathing slowed. The second rhythm continued, patient and unwavering. Outside, the wind moved through the dry rice stalks with a sound like whispered breath passing through teeth. And in the suffocating darkness of the shuttered room, something unseen seemed to settle deeper into the fragile architecture of bone and flesh, not with violence, not with haste, but with the slow certainty of rot spreading beneath unbroken skin.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Truth in the Mirror. The rain finally came, but it brought no relief. Heavy clouds rolled over Nong Sang before dawn, sealing the sky beneath a dull metallic gray. When the first drops fell, they struck the parched earth with hollow clicks, releasing the long-trapped smell of dust and heat. Within minutes, rain poured in thick sheets across the paddies, turning footpaths to mud and blurring the horizon into a trembling veil of water. Yet beneath the scent of wet soil, another odor lingered. Sweet, heavy, unmistakably wrong. Inside Molly's house, the shutters remained closed despite the heat, sealing the dim interior in a twilight gloom. The faint red glow that had pulsed on previous nights had faded, replaced by a dull gray light leaking through the cracks in the wood. Sanchai sat alone near a narrow mirror nailed crookedly to the wall. For a long time, he did not look into it. A face that no longer belonged to him. His reflection had become something he avoided. Not out of vanity, but from the growing certainty that the face looking back did not fully belong to him anymore. His skin had taken on a pale, wax-like tone, dark hollows deepened beneath his eyes. His lips appeared faintly cracked, their color drained to an unhealthy gray. But it was not the physical change that unsettled him most. It was the stillness. His reflection seemed slower to respond than his own movements, lagging a fraction of a second behind, as if reconsidering each motion before agreeing to imitate it. He lifted his hand. The reflection followed. A moment too late. He lowered it quickly, breath catching in his throat. The delay vanished. Rain hammered against the wooden walls, filling the silence with relentless sound. Still, he felt watched. The pull toward the glass. Hours passed without his awareness. The rain softened to a steady drumming, and dim daylight seeped through the shutters. Sanchai's chest tightened with each breath, the pressure beneath his sternum growing more insistent. The second rhythm within him had strengthened, no longer echoing his heartbeat, but pressing against it, testing, measuring, waiting. He told himself to stand. He did not move. He told himself to look away. Instead, his eyes lifted slowly toward the mirror. For a moment, nothing seemed unusual. Then the reflection blinked. He had not. A cold shock rippled through his limbs. He froze. The reflection stared back, unblinking. And then, slowly, it smiled. A mouth that moved without sound. Sanchai's lips trembled, but the expression in the mirror widened independently, stretching into a thin, unnatural grin that revealed darkened gums and teeth that seemed too long, too narrow. He tried to shout. His throat constricted. The reflection's mouth opened. No sound emerged. Yet inside his skull, he heard a voice, dry, layered, and breath-thin, as though spoken through soil. "You are not empty enough." The words did not echo. They settled. The woman behind the glass. The mirror's surface darkened, as though depth had replaced reflection. For a moment, he saw only shadow. Then strands of long black hair slid into view from behind his reflected shoulders, drifting forward like roots pushing through shallow water. His heart pounded. Or tried to. The second rhythm surged beneath it, slow and steady. A pale forehead emerged. Then hollow eyes filled with shifting darkness. The woman's face pressed close behind his reflection, her cheek resting against the back of his head in a gesture disturbingly intimate. Her lips parted near his ear. Though the mirror showed her, he felt her breath against his skin. Cold, damp, patient. The voice from his own throat. Somchai's chest convulsed. He forced air into his lungs and tried to scream. The sound that emerged was not his own. It came out layered, doubled, his voice strangled beneath another tone that vibrated like breath forced through wet earth. I am here. The reflection's mouth moved in perfect synchronization. But Somchai had not chosen the words. The cracks beneath the skin. Pain spread slowly across his sternum, not sharp, but deep and grinding, pressure radiating through bone as though something inside him tested the limits of its confinement. He clutched his chest. The mirror showed his fingers pressing against skin that seemed to pulse faintly from within. Hairline fissures appeared beneath the surface, not breaking the skin, but spreading like fractures through porcelain. He gasped. Behind him, he felt weight settle onto the mat. Not from above. From within the space he occupied. Molly watches. From the doorway, Molly stood motionless. Rainlight outlined her silhouette in pale gray. Her expression held neither fear nor surprise. Only quiet certainty. It is beginning, she said softly. Somchai tried to turn toward her. His body did not obey. In the mirror, the woman behind him lifted her face, her hollow eyes shifting toward Molly with slow recognition. Molly lowered her gaze reverently. A bond tightening. The pressure in Somchai's chest intensified, forcing the air from his lungs in shallow bursts. The second rhythm pulsed stronger now, each beat pushing against his own like an insistent tide. His vision blurred. The mirror darkened. The woman's face dissolved into shadow. But the sensation of her presence did not fade. It settled deeper, closer, aligned with the fragile architecture of bone and breath. Outside, rainwater streamed from the roof in steady sheets. The scent of wet soil thickened the air, mingling with the sweet, rotting undertone that had settled over the house. Inside, Somchai's breathing slowed, not stopping, adjusting, matching the slower rhythm beneath his ribs. And as the last resistance drained from his limbs, a terrible stillness filled the room, not the stillness of peace, but of something aligning, fitting itself carefully into place. The mirror cleared. Only Somchai's reflection remained. But for a fraction of a second too long, the figure inside the glass continued smiling after his own lips had fallen still. Outside, the rain eased into silence. Across Nong Sang, villagers paused in their homes, sensing, without knowing why, that something had shifted. Not ended. Not resolved. But crossed. And in the dim interior of the shuttered house, where breath and hunger now moved in quiet agreement, the fragile boundary between self and other had thinned to the width of a heartbeat. One fading. One enduring. Chapter 12. The Hand Within the Chest. By the following afternoon, the rain had stopped, leaving Nong Sang wrapped in a heavy stillness that felt thicker than the storm itself. Water pooled in the paddies, reflecting a sky bleached pale by lingering cloud cover. The air smelled of wet earth, rotting leaves, and something faintly sweet that refused to disperse. No wind moved through the rice stalks. No birds crossed the open fields. It was as if the land itself had paused to listen. The gathering. Word spread quickly that something was wrong. Not in whispers this time. Openly. Urgently. Noi arrived first at Dara's home, breathless, her voice trembling as she spoke. Others followed, neighbors, relatives, the temple caretaker, all drawn by the same unspoken certainty that the boundary between fear and action had finally collapsed. Dara stood pale and sleepless near the doorway, clutching a cloth-wrapped bundle she refused to release. Her dreams had worsened. The smell of damp soil lingered wherever she walked. And before dawn, she had awakened with the unmistakable sensation of fingers pressing outward beneath her ribs, not breaking through, but testing, searching, learning. The monk's warning echoed in every mind present. If the bond anchors, separation may no longer be possible. By late afternoon, a small group gathered at the edge of the narrow path leading to Molly's house. No one wanted to lead. Yet no one turned away. The house at the edge of the fields. The house appeared unchanged beneath the gray sky. Weathered boards, closed shutters, a sagging roofline darkened by rainwater. But the air surrounding it felt wrong, dense and resistant, as though each breath required effort. The faint odor that had haunted the village lingered strongest here, sweet and decaying beneath the scent of wet wood. The temple dogs, which had followed at a distance, stopped abruptly and refused to approach further, whining softly with their tails pressed low. Noise stepped onto the porch first. Her knuckles trembled as she knocked. No answer came. She pushed the door. It opened without resistance. Inside the dim room, the interior was dim despite the afternoon light, the shuttered windows allowing only thin blades of gray illumination to cut across the floor. The smell inside was stronger, damp soil, burnt herbs, and the unmistakable undertone of slow decay. Molly knelt beside the woven mat. Her posture was calm, composed, reverent. Somchai lay before her. For a moment, no one spoke. His body appeared thinner, as though something essential had been slowly drawn inward. His skin had taken on a dull gray pallor, mottled faintly along his arms and neck. His lips were parted slightly, breath slipping in shallow intervals through a throat that no longer seemed strong enough to support it. Yet his chest moved, slowly, unevenly, as if negotiating with a rhythm not entirely his own. The movement beneath the skin. Dara took one step forward. The cloth bundle fell from her hands. Inside, the yellowed tooth rolled free and struck the floor with a faint, brittle click. At that sound, Somchai's chest convulsed. A ripple passed beneath his skin. At first it seemed like a muscle spasm, a sudden tightening along his ribs. Then the movement repeated. Slower, more deliberate. A shape pressed outward from beneath the flesh, stretching the skin in a small, unmistakable protrusion before withdrawing again. Noi gasped. Someone behind her whispered a prayer. The movement returned, this time higher along the sternum. A long, narrow impression appeared beneath the skin, as though fingers were pressing from inside, testing the resistance of bone and flesh. Somchai's breath shuddered. But he did not wake. Molly's devotion. Molly lowered her hand gently onto his chest. The movement beneath the skin stilled instantly. Her fingers remained there, light yet possessive, as if calming a restless child. It is not pain, she said softly. Her voice held a serenity that deepened the horror in the room. It is arrival. No one answered. No one could. The hand revealed. A low cracking sound echoed beneath Somchai's sternum, not the breaking of bone, but a dry pressure, as if the structure itself were straining against something pressing outward. The skin along his chest tightened. The protrusion returned, this time unmistakable. 5 narrow impressions spread beneath the surface in slow extension, the outline of a hand pressing from within his ribcage. The shape lingered, then flexed. Dara choked on a sob. The caretaker dropped to his knees, whispering protective chants under his breath. The air grew colder. A faint ringing sound vibrated at the edge of hearing. And beneath Molly's steady palm, the hand-shaped pressure slowly relaxed, sinking back beneath the surface as if withdrawing into deeper darkness. A breath not his own. Somchai's chest rose sharply. He inhaled. The sound that emerged was layered, one breath human, ragged and weak, the other faintly delayed, sliding beneath it like an echo learning its shape. Several villagers staggered backward. The second breath continued for a moment after the first had ended. Then silence returned. Recognition. Somchai's eyes opened. They did not focus. For several seconds, they drifted across the room, unfixed and distant. Then they stopped. Not on the villagers. Not on Dara. On Molly. A faint movement touched his lips. Relief. Devotion. Or surrender. It was impossible to tell. The boundary thins. Outside, the sky darkened prematurely beneath thickening cloud. The paddies lay still, reflecting a colorless horizon. Even the insects seemed to have withdrawn from the damp air. Inside the house, no one moved. No one spoke. They had crossed beyond rumor, beyond fear, into the presence of something undeniable. Not death. Not life. Something inhabiting the fragile space between. Molly continued to cradle Somchai's chest, her fingers resting over the place where the shape had pressed outward. Her eyes closed in quiet reverence. Beneath her palm, a faint second rhythm pulsed. Steady. Patient. Enduring. And though no one saw it clearly, several in the room later swore they felt a subtle shift in the air, like the slow settling of weight into a body that had finally made space to receive it. Outside, a single gust of wind passed through the rice fields, bending the stalks in one direction before vanishing. The temple bell did not ring. No dogs barked. And as dusk gathered prematurely over Nong Sang, the villagers understood with a dread too deep for words. Something had found its way inside. And it was no longer searching for entry.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The Price of a Broken Binding. Dusk settled early over Nong Sang. Clouds pressed low against the horizon, trapping the last light of day beneath a dull, colorless haze. Smoke from cooking fires rose reluctantly into the heavy air, drifting sideways before dissolving as though the sky itself refused to receive it. No one spoke above a murmur. Even children sensed the weight that had settled over the village. Inside the temple prayer hall, oil lamps flickered weakly, their flames bending toward the floor as if pulled by an unseen current. The villagers gathered in silence, seated shoulder to shoulder on woven mats, their faces pale in the trembling light. At the front, the old monk sat motionless, waiting. The testimony. Headman Pritcha spoke first, recounting what they had witnessed, the movement beneath Somchai's chest, the second breath, the unnatural stillness in Molly's gaze. When he finished, no one asked questions. The truth had already settled into their bones. The monk closed his eyes. For a long time, he did not speak. Outside, the wind moved briefly through the tamarind trees, then died without reaching the temple steps. At last, he opened his eyes and said quietly, "The binding has failed." A ripple of dread passed through the room. What the ritual was meant to do. The ritual performed at the shrine, the monk continued, is not meant to create affection. It is meant to tether the will of one soul to another. He drew a slow breath. When performed correctly, the living remained themselves, though bound in unnatural attachment. A woman near the doorway whispered, "And when it fails?" The monk's gaze did not shift. It does not release what has been called a spirit drawn by hunger. He spoke the name again. Phai Tai Hong. Several villagers lowered their heads. "These are not spirits who died in peace," he said. "They are born from violence, betrayal, abandonment, and love that ended in unbearable torment. Their final breath carries longing too strong to dissolve." The lamps flickered. "When desire calls into such emptiness," he continued, "the spirit does not grant love. It seeks what it lacked in death: closeness, warmth, possession." The word possession settled like dust. Why it chose Somchai? Dara's hands trembled in her lap. "Why him?" she whispered. The monk regarded her with quiet compassion. He stood at the center of longing. He said, "Desired by one, promised to another, divided between futures. Such imbalance creates an opening." He paused. And he did not refuse the call. The truth struck harder than accusation. Dara lowered her gaze. "The fate of the vessel. The spirit requires anchoring," the monk continued. "Without form, it drifts. Without proximity, it starves." He traced a slow circle on the map before him. "When the bond fails, it seeks embodiment." Silence deepened. "And Molly?" Noi asked faintly. "She has offered herself as the gate," the monk said. "Her desire opened the threshold. Her devotion sustains it. The air in the hall seemed to grow colder. What now lives between them? It is no longer a simple attachment, the monk said. It is a merging of hungers. The phrase lingered. It learns from breath, he continued, from warmth, from proximity. It studies the rhythms of the living until it can remain without invitation. A low sob escaped someone near the back of the hall. Can it be removed? The caretaker asked. The monk's silence answered before his words did. If the anchoring completes, he said, separation may destroy the vessel, and not free the spirit. Signs of completion. He lifted his gaze slowly across the gathered villagers. You have already seen the signs. He counted them softly. The weakening of appetite. The scent of decay without death. Breath layered upon breath. Movement beneath the flesh. The sharing of reflection. Each phrase settled like a stone dropped into still water. When the second rhythm no longer follows, he concluded, but leads. He did not finish. He did not need to. The true price. A farmer spoke from the doorway, voice trembling. What is the cost? The monk looked toward the darkening entrance of the temple hall. The living will continue, he said, but not unchanged. He turned back to them. The spirit will not seek to leave. It will seek to remain close to warmth, to breath, to the fragile boundaries between human hearts. His voice lowered, and longing will call to it again. Outside the temple, when the villagers stepped back into the evening air, darkness had already settled over the paddies. No insects sang, no frogs called from the canals. Even the wind seemed unwilling to cross the open fields. From the direction of Molly's house, a faint glow pulsed once behind the shuttered windows, then vanished. Dara clutched the cloth-wrapped tooth in her hand, though she did not remember retrieving it. Noi stood beside her, unable to speak. Across the village, doors closed earlier than ever before. Protective charms hung from lintels. Incense smoke thickened the air inside every home. Yet no barrier felt sufficient. A hunger that remains. Deep within the shuttered house at the edge of Nong Sang, Somchai lay unmoving while Molly knelt beside him, her palm resting reverently over his chest. Beneath her hand, the second rhythm pulsed, stronger now. No longer hesitant. Aligned. Certain. Patient. And in the silent space between breaths, something listened, not with ears, but with the slow awareness of a presence learning what it means to remain among the living. Outside, the clouds pressed lower, swallowing the last trace of twilight. Across the fields, the scent of damp earth lingered, thick and sweet. And in the fragile quiet of the village night, one truth settled into every heart. Love, when twisted by desperation, does not return what was lost. It creates a hunger that refuses to be alone. Chapter 14. The fire that would not cleanse. Night fell without ceremony. No sunset bled across the paddies. No gradual dimming softened the descent into darkness. One moment the sky hovered in a dull iron gray, and the next it had hardened into blackness, thick and airless, as though the world beyond Nong Sang had been sealed away. No stars appeared. No wind crossed the fields. From house to house, lamps were lit earlier than usual. Their faint amber glowed trembling behind woven walls. Incense burned continuously, smoke coiling in slow ribbons that clung low to the floor before dissolving into the humid dark. Yet beneath the incense lingered the same sweetness, damp soil and slow decay, impossible to conceal. Impossible to ignore. The decision. The elders gathered beneath the temple eaves, their voices hushed but urgent. The monk's warning had left little room for hope. If the anchoring completed, the presence would not depart. It would remain where warmth, breath, and longing intertwined. No ritual of separation could guarantee survival. No delay promised safety. Headman Pritcha spoke what none wished to say aloud. If we do nothing, it will remain among us. Silence answered him. At last, the oldest elder exhaled slowly and whispered, "Fire purifies what cannot be untangled." No one argued, but no one felt relief. Approaching the house, they moved as a small procession through the dark, elders, the caretaker, several men carrying oil lanterns, and others bearing clay jars filled with kerosene. The monk did not accompany them, he remained seated in prayer, murmuring low chants that trembled in the humid air. Behind the group, villagers watched from doorways, hands pressed together, lips moving in silent supplication. The path narrowed as they approached the edge of the fields. Molly's house stood in silhouette against the black horizon, its shuttered windows reflecting no light. The structure appeared smaller than before, its lines subtly distorted by the heavy darkness pressing around it. The temple dogs followed only as far as the tamarind tree. There they stopped, whining softly, refusing to advance another step. The air at the threshold. As the men climbed the wooden steps, the air grew colder. Not with night chill, but with a dense stillness that resisted breath. Lantern flames flickered violently, elongating and shrinking as if drawn toward the doorway. The smell thickened. Sweet. Rotting. Wet. Pritcha raised his hand to knock. Before his knuckles touched wood, the door opened inward with a slow, dry creak. No one stood behind it. The darkness inside seemed to absorb the lantern light rather than receive it. Inside the room, Molly knelt beside the woven mat. She did not look surprised. She did not rise. Her face held a serene devotion that unsettled more deeply than fear. Somchai lay before her, thinner than any living man should be. His skin stretched taut across fragile bone. His chest rose in shallow intervals, each breath lagging slightly behind a second. Softer inhalation that seemed to originate from deeper within. The air vibrated faintly, as if charged with a sound too low to hear. "Molly," Pritcha said gently, "come away." She shook her head. "He is not alone anymore," she whispered. Her hand rested over Somchai's sternum. Beneath her palm, something shifted. The rising shape. The movement began as a tremor beneath Somchai's ribs. Then the flesh along his chest tightened. A narrow ridge pressed outward from beneath the skin, followed by 5 elongated impressions spreading slowly upward, unmistakably the outline of fingers pressing from inside the cage of bone. Several men staggered backward. Someone dropped a lantern. Oil splashed across the wooden floor, its flame sputtering wildly before being smothered beneath a hurried foot. Somchai's breath convulsed. The second rhythm surged, no longer echoing, no longer following. Leading. The hand-shaped pressure flexed. For a moment, the shape seemed to reach toward Molly's palm. She bowed her head in reverence. "It is awake," she murmured. The voice that was not one. Somchai's lips parted. The sound that emerged was layered, his voice strangled beneath another tone. Damp and breath-thin, as though drawn through wet soil. "Do not separate?" The words vibrated through the wooden floorboards. Through bone. Through breath. Dara, standing in the doorway, collapsed to her knees, sobbing into her hands. "The fire is lit." Pritcha closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, grief had replaced hesitation. "Forgive us," he whispered. The kerosene was poured quickly along the walls, soaking the old wood that had endured decades of monsoon rains and scorching seasons. The sharp chemical scent cut briefly through the sweetness of decay. Molly did not move. She gathered Somchai's hand between her own. "You promised you would never leave," she said softly, whether to the villagers, to the spirit, or to herself, none could tell. A torch touched the soaked boards. Flame leapt instantly upward, bright and hungry. Fire and shadow. The blaze spread with unnatural speed, racing along the kerosene trails and climbing the dry beams of the roof. Heat roared outward, forcing the villagers back down the steps as smoke thickened and sparks spiraled into the air. Inside the burning doorway, 2 silhouettes writhed within the growing inferno. Molly's figure remained kneeling. Somchai's body arched upward. Between them, for a brief and terrible instant, a third shape lifted from his chest, elongated, bending forward, its head emerging where no head should exist. Several witnesses screamed. Others fell to their knees, chanting desperately. The flames surged higher. The third shape twisted, then dissolved into the blaze. The sound within the fire. Above the crackle of burning wood rose a sound no one would later describe the same way. Some heard wailing. Some heard laughter. Others heard breath drawn sharply through unseen lungs. But all agreed on one detail. The sound did not fade immediately when the roof collapsed inward. It lingered, as if something within the fire resisted release. Ashes in the field. By the time the flames subsided, only charred beams and a smoldering skeleton of blackened wood remained. Smoke drifted low across the fields, carrying the scent of burnt resin and something heavier, sweeter, impossible to name. No bodies were recovered. No bones remained visible among the ashes. The villagers stood in stunned silence as embers dimmed to dull red beneath the dark sky. The wind did not return. A shape in the smoke. As the last flames died, a faint current of air stirred the ash. For a moment, the drifting smoke formed a shape, two figures bent close together, their outlines merging at the chest. Then the shape collapsed into gray dust. No one spoke of it aloud. Yet each person present carried the image home like a brand pressed into memory. The fire does not cleanse everything. When the villagers returned to their homes, they found the incense had burned down to ash. The temple bell did not ring. The dogs remained silent. And though the smell of smoke lingered in the air, beneath it, faint but unmistakable, remained the scent of damp earth after rain. As if something had not departed, but merely changed form.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Hunger That Remained. Morning returned to Nong Sang without birdsong. A thin gray light spread across the paddies, revealing the charred skeleton where Molly's house had stood. Smoke no longer rose from the blackened beams, yet the earth beneath them remained dark and damp, as though the ground itself had absorbed more than rainwater and ash. No one approached at first. From a distance, the ruin seemed smaller than memory allowed, its presence reduced to a smudge against the pale horizon, but the absence it left behind felt vast, a hollow pressed into the edge of the village. Impossible to ignore. When the sun lifted higher, several men walked quietly to the site. They found no bones, no jewelry, no trace of cloth, only warped nails, cracked roof tiles, and ash so fine it lifted at the slightest movement, drifting away like breath released from unseen lungs. One man knelt and pressed his palm to the soil. It was cold, a silence without closure. The villagers expected relief. They expected the air to lighten, the dogs to bark again, the insects to resume their relentless chorus by dusk. Instead, a peculiar stillness lingered. The sweetness of decay had faded, replaced by the lingering scent of wet soil after heavy rain, a smell that clung faintly to clothing and skin long after one returned indoors. People spoke softly, as though afraid to disturb something resting just beyond hearing. Doors remained closed earlier than before. Children were called inside at the first hint of twilight. And though the temple bell rang at its usual hours, its tone seemed thinner, as if its echo were swallowed before traveling its full distance. Somchai's name. No funeral rites were performed. Without remains, there was no body to prepare, no cremation to sanctify, no ashes to gather and carry to the river. The monk offered prayers for wandering souls, his voice steady but subdued, and the villagers knelt with bowed heads, each lost in private thoughts they did not share. Dara attended the prayers, her face drawn and sleepless. She did not weep openly. Grief seemed to have settled deeper than tears could reach. When the monk placed a thread bracelet around her wrist for protection, she clutched it as though anchoring herself to something solid. At night, she slept with a lamp burning beside her mat. Still, she woke often before dawn, certain she had heard breathing near her ear, soft, patient, waiting for her to fall fully asleep. Ash across the fields. 3 days after the fire, a wind finally crossed the paddies. It arrived without warning, bending the rice stalks in long rippling waves and lifting ash from the blackened ruin. Fine gray dust spiraled into the air and drifted outward across the fields, settling in irrigation canals, along footpaths, and in the woven fibers of doormats. Children found gray smudges on their ankles after playing. Women discovered faint streaks along freshly washed cloth. The ash did not stain, but it lingered. The elders said nothing. The dogs returned. On the fourth evening, The temple dogs barked for the first time since the fire. The sound startled the village into stillness. Men stepped into doorways. Women paused beside cooking fires. Children clutched at their mother's clothing. The barking continued, sharp and uncertain, directed toward the dark edge of the paddies beyond the ruined house. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed felt deeper than before. The girl in the neighboring village. A month passed. Life resumed its routines with cautious persistence. Rice was harvested, nets were mended, children returned to games beneath the tamarind trees, though they avoided the path near the ruin. News traveled slowly between villages, carried by traders and relatives visiting from distant farms. It arrived one afternoon in the form of a quiet remark. A girl in Bangkok, the neighboring village beyond the canal, had begun wearing a red thread around her neck. She had fallen in love with a man already promised to another. She had been seen walking alone toward the old forest shrine at dusk. The elders did not speak when they heard this, but their silence deepened. Dara's last dream. That night, Dara dreamed again. She stood at the edge of a field beneath a starless sky. The air smelled of damp earth and distant smoke. The horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. She was not alone. Footsteps sounded behind her, soft, measured, unhurried. She did not turn. Warm breath touched the back of her neck. Then a second breath followed, slightly delayed. She woke before the figure could speak. The lamp beside her mat flickered, though no wind stirred the room. For a long time, she sat upright, listening to the silence. What remains? In the weeks that followed, villagers claimed the edge of the fields felt colder just before dawn. Others said they sometimes smelled wet soil when no rain had fallen. A few insisted they heard faint murmuring carried on the wind when the paddies lay perfectly still. No one investigated. Some truths, once glimpsed, are safer left unexamined. The ruined foundation at the edge of Nong Sang was eventually reclaimed by grass. Charred beams collapsed inward and disappeared beneath creeping vines. Children grew accustomed to its presence and stopped asking what had happened there. But older villagers never crossed that patch of ground after sunset. And when the wind moved across the paddies at night, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly sweet beneath it, they closed their doors and spoke in hushed tones until the sound passed. The hunger does not end. Love, when twisted by desperation, does not disappear. It lingers in the spaces between promises and longing, in the quiet ache of unreturned devotion, in the fragile hope that closeness can be forced where it was never freely given. Some say the spirit that answered Molly's plea did not perish in the fire. It changed. It learned. It waits where longing gathers. And when desire outweighs acceptance, when devotion turns toward possession, when the living call into emptiness with a heart unwilling to release, something listens, not with ears, not with mercy, but with a patience shaped by hunger and the memory of breath. In the deep hours before dawn, when the wind stills and the earth holds the night's last moisture, the fields beyond Nong Sang sometimes carry a faint, unfamiliar rhythm. One breath, then another. Not perfectly aligned. Not yet. But learning. They say love cannot be forced. Yet somewhere, in villages where the wind carries the scent of damp earth and forgotten prayers, people still whisper to the unseen, hoping to be loved, hoping to never be left behind. And sometimes, something listens. Not with compassion, but with patience. So if you ever feel a second breath beside your own in the stillness before dawn, do not turn around. Because some bonds, once formed, are never meant to be broken.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.